everybody, welcome to Tree Talk. Here we are in the tree house. Unfortunately, my guest today is not actually physically in the tree house, but he's with us online in the ether, in the internet ether somewhere. And my guest today is John Crawford. Hello, John.
Hello, Sheena. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
That's good. It's great to meet you at last.
Yes.
And John is a hypno-psychotherapist, am I right?
That would be accurate. Thank you. Yeah.
And an author.
Yes. Primarily an author now.
Yes.
An ex-hypnotherapist at this point.
Yeah.
But
so that really is my first question, John.
Yeah.
Is what made you make that decision to go from being a therapist with a practice to being an author? A full-time author. What was behind that decision?
Well, the first book that I released, Anxiety Relief, started its life as a document that I started to give to my clients whilst I was working with them. And this is a quite a quirky little story, really. There was this one. I loved this lady that I worked with. She was a joy, and I felt that way about most of my clients, perhaps not all of them, but most of them. This lady was a joy, and we were real friends as well in the consulting room. But she just didn't retain information very well. And so we would do these sessions, and I would tell her all this stuff, and she'd come back the next week, and I'd say, such and such, and she would say, "Oh, really?" And I'd say, yeah, we talked about this last week. Oh, did we? So at that point, I came home and resolutely, after this happened for about the fourth time, went, right, I'm going to write it down and give it to you so you can't forget. And then that became the document that really started the book. And then I kept expanding on it. And as it got bigger and bigger, my clients were always saying to me, "You must publish this." And I was, "Oh yeah, maybe one day, maybe I will, I don't know." And I never really thought it would happen. But eventually somebody talked me into it, and I went, "Okay, right, look, I'm just gonna get on with this." And it was odd. I'm not quite sure what happened, but I woke up one day. It was a Monday morning. I think it was November 2015. I think that would have been right. And it was a Monday morning, and I wasn't in a bad mood or anything, but I just thought, I have to stop. I was exhausted. And I think what it was that it was just depleted. Rather, exhausted might not be the right word. I was depleted. I'd done 13 years as a therapist at that point, and I just had come to the end of it. So then I thought, all right, well then let's try this book and see if we can make something of it. And that's really just how it unfolded. So over the next 3 months, oh, by the way, I mean, I'd had a little bit of savings. I knew that I could perhaps support myself for 6 months to a year, maybe at most. And let's see how we get on with this book. So I spent sort of 3 or 4 months knocking it into shape. And then published it, and of course it wasn't an overnight success, but over the years it's gotten going, and that's how it started. So yeah.
So you published yourself. You didn't go through any kind of traditional.
No. I at first I was just doing a lot of research. Then I found I think I started by finding Nick Stevenson. Do you know who Nick Stevenson is?
Yeah. Speed of Magnet.
Right, lovely. Yeah, and that was kind of where I started, and I started watching the freebies, where you can watch the how to make fans of readers into fans and so on. Yeah. And I ummed and ahed, and then eventually got led to Mark Dawson's course, and I think that was just as he brought it out, really. And for me, it was a lot of money at that time, especially since I didn't have an income. Yeah. But I decided, well, okay, I think it felt risky, but I thought we'd give it a go, and I was so glad that I did. But for me, the main benefit of that has been the community. I don't know whether you feel the same, but I mean that's just been worth so much.
Absolutely. I mean, we must have started at the same time. We must have been enrolled at the same time, because I enrolled end of 2016.
Yeah. Yeah, I would have been perhaps a little earlier, but round about,
Okay.
yeah, would have been about right. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think
Yeah.
that was before he put the price up.
Right.
It was quite cheap. Well, I say it was quite cheap. It was still dear as far as I was concerned, because my husband bought it for me for my birthday.
Oh,
I remember that. So it was the end of 2016.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's worth its weight in gold just for community alone, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I still haven't completed the course. I'm learning, the thing is, I don't know how you feel, John, but there is so much to learn with publishing yourself.
It's endless, I think.
Yeah. How did you find that process? I mean, did you feel naturally, I must learn all I have to learn? Or how do you learn things? Do you learn by osmosis, or do you learn by writing things down, or do you learn by doing? It reminds me of that old Indian, or is it Chinese proverb that says, what is it? I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand.
Yeah, that's great. I'm not aware of that one, but it's nice.
Yeah.
I'm quite techie anyway, because we're both musicians, right? And that's kind of how we recognize each other initially, I think.
Your musicianship.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But so I'm quite techie, because I understand, that's quite technical with computers and software and stuff like that. So the technical side of things wasn't too difficult for me. I just did my research, and really I had most of what I knew or what I needed before I'd actually done the Mark Dawson's course. So I didn't really need very much of it. I've only ever watched 2 or 3 hours.
Okay, so you had the website. I had the website set up. You had a mailing list.
Yeah, no, mailing list is something that I did use the course for, actually.
Mailing list,
and that's underway, but it's slow. Mine's slow, because I did a lot of list building at first, but I found that people, the readers that tended to go for that, I think just probably had hundreds of free books on their Kindles and would never really get around to sort of, you might catch a few, but I just didn't feel like the response was very good when I put mails out, and I felt like I was shouting into the void, really, initially. And so I stopped list building in that way. I know there are other people who list build in other ways, but it's now just very, very organic. It just comes through the website and through the back of the books and the offers in the books, and that's made a much more responsive list. And I've made some wonderful friends through that as well.
So you're building your list organically through your backlist, through your own your book list.
Yeah.
Which is, like, as you say, it's not the only way to build a list, is it? When we're told we need to start off with that email list. And I kind of appreciate the philosophy behind that. But sometimes, it is hard at first, that you do feel like you're shouting into the void. And when you get no response, it's like, oh, okay.
It's a bit heartbreaking.
It's a bit disheartening. But I don't know about you, but I just get so encouraged by, even if it's just one person who messages me on Facebook or whatever and says, like, for example, I did an interview in here a couple of weeks ago for the Witchlit show, because I run a Witchlit group on Facebook, and we interviewed somebody, quite a prolific top-selling author in the pagan field, and put that out. And I got a message from somebody a couple of days later saying, and of course I put all the links in the show notes, John, so don't worry, I'll put all the links in the show notes. Because you have to be discoverable, don't you? You want people to be as visible as possible, to make it easier for your audience to find you, you know. And it's not just me. I love promoting other people, so I put all the links in, and of course I put my link in at the bottom as well. And I had a lady just contact me and say, saw your interview with Rachel Patterson, loved it, and bought one of your books, and I've pre-ordered the next book. And I was like, wow, do you know what I mean? If I had sort of like 10 of those a week, that would be, but it's slow, but that kind of thing is fuel for your fire, isn't it? It keeps you going.
Definitely.
Keeps you going.
So Yeah, those emails are an absolute joy. And I always thank all the people that write to me, and it's really sincere. You know, it is sincere, because I think Mark said this, didn't he? Mark Dawson, right off the bat, and you know, he said, I always reply to everybody personally. I mean, that would be a matter of courtesy to me anyway, because that's just the kind of person I am. But I don't do it for the reason of you know, there's nothing, there's no agenda behind it other than just being human, and we are all human, aren't we? You know, we're on no pedestal.
Absolutely, and wanting to share your message.
Yeah.
I mean, I would imagine that behind your decision to go from therapist to writer is the feeling that you want to share what you have shared with other people for 13 years. You want to share that message, and you get it out to a bigger audience, which is what books do, don't they? That's certainly the you know, the reason behind me now wanting to write more than ever. Like you, I've been a therapist for many years, and you can only help so many people.
Absolutely. That's part of the answer to the question that you asked me before, which I failed to deliver on, really, was that one of the main reasons for finishing that book more than anything was that I thought, if I'm going to, because I didn't kind of know what I was going to do. The book was a hopeful thing. I just knew I had to stop being a therapist.
Right.
So I didn't know where I was going to go next. Quite. I just thought I just need some time to absorb. But there was one thing that I was sure of, which was that the knowledge and understanding that I'd gained, not only as a therapist in those 13 years, but in the time that I'd been pretty desperately ill in my earlier life as well, which all became part of the same package, really. I just thought there's no way that can go with me. You know, I can't not disseminate that in some way, shape or form, which is really what the primary reason for the book was. The fact that it's made it possible for me to be an author is almost secondary, but it's very nice. I'm not grumbling.
So do you mind sharing a little bit of your story, your personal story that came before actually what made you become a therapist? Let's rewind back a little bit more.
As a 20-year-old, my head was full of all sorts of weird ideas. So I ended up getting into shamanism and quantum physics, and started to, it was really just a very curious mind. So I started to put all this stuff together and ended up with some funny ideas, which then took on a life of their own. Once all the stress got loaded into that, and basically suffered a psychotic break, really, and started to think some extremely strange things, which frightened the life out of me, and set off this chain of terrible anxiety. And then the depression followed the anxiety, because I didn't know what to do with myself with these awful feelings and so on. And really it was a 10-year recovery of visiting therapists and shamans and acupuncturists and so on, all of which were off track, really. They weren't where I needed to go. So there's a lot of what's led up to the contents of the books for me. Is that message of, you know, you can be well intentioned, but if you're in the wrong place and you're going to the wrong type of therapist and you're doing the wrong kind of process, you might not get better that way. You have to understand what your situation is, and then get the appropriate help.
I have to say, I share the same kind of backstory as you in many ways, but having recently consumed Anxiety Relief, your book, through audio, so I listened to it when I was out walking. I was so impressed with it from a therapist's point of view, but also because you touched on everything. You didn't just go down one road. It's a completely, pardon the pun, but it's a completely open book, isn't it? You talk about mysticism, you talk about the tarot, you talk about Jung, you know, you talk about mythology, you talk about you combine all the things that influence our consciousness and our subconscious, which is that kind of, you know, below the surface of the iceberg, part of the iceberg that we don't see.
Absolutely.
And I just thought it was brilliant. I thought it was brilliant.
Thank you so much.
Honestly, and I think that, you know, that deserves to get out there, because let's just go back to when you were healing and you tried all these different things. What actually did make the big difference to you then?
Yeah,
what helped you the most?
It's a great question. It was definitely, well, I went to a therapist. Okay, so if I just back up slightly, I kind of got to this point after about 6 years where I was utterly bereft, really, just desperate. And my wife and I went on this holiday to Cornwall, and I had this fantasy that if I just had a week off work and went to Cornwall and got out in the fields, it would be wonderful. And it just rained torrentially the whole week,
as it does in Cornwall.
Yeah, except for like one day. And this one day we walked down to this, and I was just miserable. I just felt so awful here. And my wife went in and bought herself a pint, and I was so anxious I couldn't even have a pint on my holiday. There's all this beautiful stuff around me. So anyway, a long story short, that was the lowest point. And because it was raining, I had this book, which was The Road Less Travelled, which is quite a famous book.
Oh, I've read that.
Scott Peck.
And
it just happened to be there at the right time in the right place. And as I opened the book, I was kind of stuck with this book because I think it was the only book I had, and it was raining outside, so I had to read it. So it said, it opens with the words "Life is hard."
That's it.
And I'm like, well, okay, and then as you read through, it gets a little bit preachy towards the end. But the basic message was that your pain is about your resistance. It's our resistance that causes our agony. And there's a saying, isn't there, in therapy, that pain is pain, but suffering is pain resisted. And this was really his message, and I took this away, and he was basically talking a lot about seeing a therapist and getting serious about psychotherapy. And I thought, right, that's it, I'm just going to do it. I don't care I didn't have any money at the time, but I don't care how much it costs or what it's going to take. I have to do this now, because I'd reached that point where I was finished, really. Spent would be the right word. So I got home, did search somebody out. Sorry, this is a long answer to your question, but it's hopefully an interesting story nonetheless. So I sought somebody out and met this guy, and he was lovely and he was very helpful, and some pretty amazing stuff happened for a while, but then it got a bit samey, and he said, well, you know what, I think I perhaps need to refer you on, but I know this amazing woman. And he said, I've seen her do these really incredible sessions. And I was, of course, brilliant. Anyway, I went to meet this lady, and I have written about this in the books, but it's a nice story. She was a force. I mean, she's still around. I don't know if I should mention her. She does something else completely different now, so she's not a therapist anymore, but she's doing good work out in the world.
I don't see why you can't mention.
Okay, well, the organisation is called Tree Sisters, treesisters.org, and they plant trees in I think they've been doing projects in India, and they may be in other places, and it's a female only.
I think I've heard of them. Yeah.
She started that, and her name she's called Claire Dubois now, I think.
Okay.
So, but an amazing woman, and even if you just go and check out some of her videos, you can see what a passionate soul she is, and quite extraordinary. I've never met anybody quite like her. But what happened was that I went in and I was sort of feeling like, oh, I'm going to be judged, and she's going to, who is this lady? And it was intimidating, I have to say, because this was a person who sat me down, and I asked my story, and she was very sweet, very nice and everything. But then she kind of, came right up to me, sat about a foot away from me, and looked me straight in the eye. Yeah. And now tell me about it. And I don't know, something happened where I finally felt fully seen, and it was quite intimidating. I felt quite naked, but I felt safe with her, and very quickly we started to get to doing some work, and she took a completely different approach and said, okay, shut your eyes, let's go into your body. So that was different from anything that I'd ever done, in a way, even though I'd done all this Reiki and spiritual healing and acupuncture and shamanism, which it had some reflections of that stuff, but there was something about the way she held the space and the way that she was willing to just go right to it. And she taught me, really, over quite a fair period of time, maybe 6 months to a year, just how to meet all the shame, all the guilt, all the layers of stuff that we have covering up our pain, and just taught me to hold and love the pain, and not to fear it, but to go into it and sit with it and be compassionate. And she just managed to demonstrate that to me, and it was an absolute revelation. And it was from that point forward, almost immediately from the session one, I came home and I said to my wife, this lady's going to be able to help me. I mean, I felt better already. It was
that's it. Oh, that's wonderful. How long did you see her for?
I think I was with her for about a year. It's a bit vague actually, but a year to a year and a half perhaps, but I think regularly at first and then less regularly so. And it's worth telling you this lovely story. My last session, I walked in, sat down, and she said, how are you doing? And I said, yeah, I think I'm good. I think I'm all right. And she said, is there anything you want to talk about? And I said, I don't think so, not really. And it, as was customary, because we did so much sort of inner work in quiet, we just sat there with our eyes closed together and meditated together for about 40 minutes. And I said, okay, I think we're done. And she said, yeah, so do I. And I paid her for the session, rightly so, and gave her a big hug, and we were kind of done. I mean, I did see her once or twice when I had a few wobbly moments again later on, but it was a really nice way to finish the work. We just sat in silence. And
that's lovely. Yeah. So what happened next, John? The next part of the story, what did you do?
What
made you decide to be a therapist?
Oh, so how did I become a therapist? Yeah, I think it was within a year. That I mean, that was just so, it was such a gift. You know, they talk about the Dharma. You know the Dharma, the Dharma.
Yes.
It's a Buddhist term, and they say that the Dharma cannot be taught. It can only be transmitted. Well, that sounds like a very lofty idea, but I that's the way I felt about what she did with me, and I felt like it was, she transmitted that to me in some way. Yeah. It wasn't something she told me. She demonstrated it with her being.
A transmission.
Exactly. I was able to feel it because of the way she held the space. And although I would never have wanted to emulate her because she was unique, I just felt like I now held that torch in some way. And I thought, well, I don't know how I would teach this other than to do it with people. Yeah. And so that was how I ended up becoming a therapist. And I went off and found a really good course actually in Bristol. And it was in its early stages then. It's still going. There's 12 centres now in the UK from that practice that I learned my craft at. And we were a small bunch of people, but it was a year, basically a year's training. I know there's very long training. I've got a friend who's doing the 7-year one, and he's on year 5. Yeah, okay, you know, make what you will of that. But one was enough to get me started personally. I'm not sure whether it's enough for everybody, but I'd had enough experience of, you know, walking the road and then being the patient. And really, hypnotherapy is a place to begin. Is easy because it's a case of just teaching people to relax and then giving them positive suggestions and so on. It's very nice, therapeutic. I don't know if you've had it, but it's nice to receive. It's like a meditation or a verbal massage, I used to say, of somebody lulling you into a very nicely, deeply relaxed space, which is therapeutic in itself. And then if we say the right things in those moments, that can sometimes stick for people. And that's the basis of it. As you develop as a hypnotherapist, you become more and more intuitive with it, as you would with any therapy that you learn. And it becomes, you know, much more complex would be the wrong word, but involved, I think. And certainly I ended up doing quite a lot of analytical hypnotherapy, which I love to this day. There are plenty of people who are still against analytical hypnotherapy. I suspect it may be that not everybody does it well. I think it's something that you have to have a fair bit of intuitive skill about.
What do you mean by that? Well. Can you explain what is analytical hypnotherapy?
Sorry, I should explain. Yeah, so I'll try and be brief on it. Analytical hypnotherapy is when you take somebody into a hypnotic space, which is another way of just saying a very quiet, calm, relaxed space. And what happens in that is, as with a meditation, is that you're able to bring your attention much more quietly to what's going on inside. And the more subtle feelings that are within our body are easier to tune in to. That's essentially what happens. So then you would say to somebody, if they've come in with a very specific fear, you might say, can you tune into that fear, or do you remember the last time you felt it? And then you basically start to follow it back, and you ask them, when you think about that feeling or feel into that feeling, if it could speak, what would it be saying to you? And it would be saying, I feel really afraid. And then you'd say, could you tell me more about being afraid? And what does that remind you of anything, for instance? Or tell me more about that. And eventually a picture will start to emerge, and it will root back to a causative event usually, but it might not just be a single cause. There might be multiple causes, or it might just be a time in a person's life, but effectively you're getting really back down to the roots of things. And the hypnosis, just again, we're talking about that safety, because people are so very relaxed at that time. They just feel much safer to go that bit deeper. And so one of the arguments against analytical hypnotherapy is that some people think, well, it will pull up all this negative stuff and then they'll be left to deal with it, which I think historically may have been one of the ways that people have worked with analytical hypnotherapy. Is they've just said, speak it and then let's move on. Well, what I was always able to do was to bring everything I'd learned from my therapy together, which was all that about self-compassion and learning to be really present and compassionate to our pain. But I was able to bring that and put those two things together. So for me, the complete analytical hypnotherapy was to get somebody back to the root, then to teach them to be really compassionate with their pain, and then beyond that, also using again other hypnotherapy modalities to reframe the event. So I might say, to somebody who feels awful about themselves, let's go back and explore what was going on. Let's say that they might say, well, my dad's leaving, and I think it's because of me. So I would have to basically take that situation and help them to understand, whilst in this space of being connected with that very young self. So very often it was kind of inner childlike work.
Yeah.
But help them to understand that it's not about, or help the child, in fact, to understand it's not about him or her. It's about the fact that mum and dad aren't getting on. So these are the kind of misunderstandings that get carried forward as feelings, which I'm sure you're familiar with that as a healer yourself, those ideas. But it's just one way of approaching it.
Yeah, and sort of like that back history of patterns, behaviour patterns that keep repeating themselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you find that now you've written 5 books, and the audience that you are reaching out to, and you say that they, you get emails from people and everything, does anybody email you and say, excuse me, John, do you mind giving me a therapy session? Does anybody else do that? What happens?
Yeah, I've had a few, but I'm quite firm about it actually, and just saying that no, I'm afraid.
Boundaries.
Because but not in an uptight way. But I had to draw a line under that. Because I think part of what caused my burnout was saying yes to too many things that I probably shouldn't have as well.
Yeah.
And the writing and all the marketing and everything really does require your full attention, as you know. It's a full-time job.
Yeah.
And,
So that's my next question. How do you tackle your marketing? What is your process? What do you do?
Okay, so a decent website. I think my website's okay.
It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Very good. Very impressive. The books, I mean, you've got loads of information.
Yeah.
Anybody that had just been introduced to you for the first time, that the next thing they'd want to do is buy a book. They wouldn't need to find out anything else, I don't think, because it's all there. You've got your background, all your qualifications. It's fantastic. No, it really is good. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think decent website. But I think the perma-free book does quite well. That was my story.
Okay.
That book I'm perhaps more uncomfortable about than any, but that's just because it's so personal and so revealing. And
what was that?
That's called Dear Anxiety, This Is My Life. So that's that's free if you sign up at the website for the readers group, but it's also free on Amazon as well. So that, I mean, that gets downloaded quite a lot. So I guess people are reading it, and I do get some feedback.
I think I signed up for your newsletter yesterday, actually.
Oh, okay, well then
so
you should
receive
have, yeah, you should have a mail that will.
But is it an ebook or?
It's an ebook, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But so I think that helps in terms of marketing. I'm sure it does, because it's. I know that not everybody who downloads it will read it. There's a lot of people that will just say, "I'll do that another day. I've got loads on my Kindle that I've to get round to." I think that helps, and then I do Facebook ads and Amazon ads.
And as a non-fiction writer, have you got any inkling to be a fiction writer in any way? Because you are a storyteller, you tell great stories.
Oh, thanks.
You're a great writer, so you know.
I've started a couple.
Have you?
Which yeah, I've done a couple, and one of them has got potential. So I did a few, yeah, but one of them's got potential, and I perhaps don't want to say too much about it, but it's a bit sci-fi, and I don't know if I'm ever going to finish it, but I'm going to have a go. Yeah, it would be nice.
That is the thing. It's actually finishing something, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I mean, how long did it take you to write your books? How long did it take you to write Anxiety Relief?
I think that one was probably. It probably was about six months, I think.
Yeah.
It was a difficult book to write, actually, that one. It was.
Yeah. What is your process when you're writing, John?
Yeah. Well, I'm one of these that's a bit meticulous as I go. So I know that some people they'll blurt it out, and that's their first draft, and then they'll go back and tidy. I'm much more meticulous as I go. If I'm not happy with a page, I won't move on until I've got it. Then it will always go back through at least 1 to 2 edits, and then a proofread at the very least. Yeah. So yeah, I mean and I'll always go back and improve on. Well, that could be. So I suppose once all the information is there, then I'll go back and say, okay, that could be said a bit better, and then tidy it up that way. And sometimes a bit of reordering. Like I'm doing a book at the moment. I actually don't know what it's going to be just yet, quite. I know what I want to say in it, and I've got all these various different chapters. But for me, it's about the flow as well. So it's about making sure that the book flows nicely, and kind of, I almost start out with a feeling of this is what I want to communicate, and then I've got to figure out how that's going to all fit together. But I like that process, and I love the feeling of seeing it all and then reading it through and saying, okay, that's worked. You've got it, you know.
Yeah. Okay. So, as a non-fiction writer to date, what advice would you give to somebody like me who is a fiction writer? Although I have written a non-fiction book, I did a non-fiction guidebook for my Oracle deck, which I published 6 years ago now.
Right.
So I've had some experience, and I've done sort of magazine articles, non-fiction. But I want to write a Treehouse Magic series. You know, sort of psychic development, that kind of thing.
Right. Okay.
The magical nature. So what would be your advice? Because I'm kind of I've nearly finished my book 3 of my Witchlit series. So even though there's loads of scope for continuing with that, I want to do some non-fiction. Right. So what would be your advice?
Well, I think the first thing is to figure out what your central message is. Because there's going to be lots of different parts to what you're wanting to communicate there, isn't there? What would be what is your central message on those books?
Really, basically understanding the magical nature, the essence of who we are,
right?
The heart and soul of who we are as individuals, and fulfill and learning to discover that, understand it, and use it, integrate it into our daily lives. So fulfilling our potential. Really, our creative potential is kind of what I love to share with people. That's when I give readings in here. That's the message that I'm giving out to every single person. You know, how to let go of what you don't need, what doesn't serve you anymore, how then to move on, accept who you are for what you are, and you know, sort of empower ourselves with that sort of understanding and to that uniqueness that each of us has got.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've done it various different ways. So I've done the mind maps.
Mind map thing, yeah.
So the mind map would be, okay, my central message is, and you put that in the middle. I'm sure you're familiar with these. And then you ask, okay, what are the main forks off of that? So you might have kind of 6 wheels that come off the central wheel, and then you enlarge into various specifics that come off that. And that right there would be the book, effectively.
They're your chapters.
They're your chapters.
Come off the spider are your chapters. Yeah, I've started. You know, I've had this idea for a few years now. I've started, so okay, thank you. I will continue with that.
But more recently, I have to just say, the last book was a bit more of a wing it one, and I quite enjoyed that process of just letting it kind of percolate and come in its own good time, and suddenly something would come up and I think, okay, then that's got to go in there. And occasionally, even now, I think, oh, that should have been in that book, you know, something I've missed, or but so I'm experimenting with that at the moment rather than being quite so structured, and it's an enjoyable process.
So you haven't only written books, you've recorded books, you've got audio books as well, because that's how I read your anxiety. So tell me about that. Tell us about that process.
Okay. Well, the first one was an absolute nightmare. Because although I've got the technical musical skills here, I've got a recording equipment actually in front of me right now, and I got the gear to do it, but I think it was difficult to learn how to do the delivery correctly. So the Audible wanted all of the breaths taken out. And when I started, I think it must have taken me like 2 days to do a couple of chapters or something.
All the breaths taken out? How do you do that?
So I was trying to bypass the situation with software that claimed to be able to take the breaths out. That didn't work very well. So it's a lot of wasted time initially trying to figure out. And what they suggested was that you had a little bit of room noise. So you just basically record an empty room, and then you go through your file and you drop a little bit of room noise everywhere there's a breath. And I thought, oh my goodness, that sounds like it's going to take forever. So I think I wasted a lot of time trying to get around that, and eventually realized, oh, well, let's try it their way. And then it was about just learning to deliver a long sentence and then take a nice deep breath and finish off the rest of the sentence like that. And then I could see it on the graph. So I don't know if this is probably a bit techie, but to get to the point, you could just, I found that I could edit as quickly as I could speak eventually. So now it's much quicker, and I think there's also a little bit of learning to get your tongue to pronunciate correctly, and mouth noises and stuff like that. It's a bit tricky, but it's I mean, it's not as difficult as you might think.
I thoroughly enjoyed listening to your book when I was out. I thought the production was top banana.
Thanks.
You know, I mean, the production was amazing, because I mean, I'm very tuned into sound because being a musician, you know, so I appreciate and understand the necessity to, as it is with any format that you're creating in, is to have a good presentation. You know, with sound, that needs to be, you need to have that clarity of audio, which yours is. I didn't ever feel that, oh, there's a sound in the background and all that's a bit muffled there, or oh, there's a crackle there. It was perfect. You know, I thought the tenor of your voice was very good, the way you used your voice, the expressions, you know, you put color into your...
Gonna make me have a shucks moment here.
So how much so you did it yourself? You did all the recording yourself? How, that cost you, apart from time? Really just the equipment, I suppose?
Yeah, really just the equipment. Yeah, I mean, basic equipment, I think you're looking at, if you were starting from scratch, you're looking at about 150 to 200 pounds for a decent microphone and a decent audio interface, which is another way of saying a sound card. These days you have an external sound card. which you can plug a mic into, which has good preamps. That's the most important thing. Okay. So I recommend Focusrite for their budget version, decent preamps. So in other words, you could pay a fortune for preamps, but Focusrite are known for, you know, decent prices and really good preamps. And that's all you need really, is a great microphone like a Shure SM58, or I can't even remember what mine is. It's a slightly different. It's a D5. Can't remember the maker, the name, but they're both similar. And
we've got a couple of SM58s.
Yeah, they're really popular. But I mean, that's very much a different taste, because other people really like condenser mics. But personally, I tried to help somebody else, a colleague, do her hypnotherapy recordings, and I warned her about condenser mics, and she bought both. She bought a condenser mic, and she wasn't happy with the output in the end, because they're so sensitive that they pick up every mouth voice.
Do you know what? It just sounds like Ian, my husband, who I bought a condenser mic for performing a few years ago, and do you know what? We never use it. I mean, because mostly we're plugging into other people's equipment when we're performing anyway. Yeah. But even if we do our own gig, he'll use an SM58, because he says to me, it's so sensitive, Sheena. All you got to do is just like, and it just comes out, you know. Yeah. So yeah, I understand that. So,
but other people swear by them and say no, they're better. So that's up to them. But for my preference is for one of those guys, because they're solid. They pick up what they need to, and not too much more. So about £200 in total, and it didn't cost me anything more. The only other thing is the mastering is a little bit specific. They want the mastering, just for anybody who doesn't know, is the final polish that makes sure that if you spoke a bit loud, it will pull that bit down and make sure that everything comes out nice, and that you take out any room noise and take out any background noise and so on. And that I was able to do that because of my interest in music and sound production over the years. It's not beyond the average person, but it would expect a learning curve on that if you don't know what you're doing. But the mastering process doesn't need to be terribly expensive if you had to get someone else to do it. It's basically about setting a level and then just letting it go. And if they've all been recorded the same, you can put the same master on all of them anyway, all your tracks, I mean. So but it's I enjoy doing them. But
And so what else have you got in the pipeline? What's coming up? So you're writing something at the moment that you're not sure what it's going to be.
Yeah, I'm being a little bit glib there. It's about I am being a little bit glib. What I meant when I said I don't know what it's going to be is I don't know what its title is going to be yet. I'm still thinking about that, because obviously getting the title is really important, getting that right. Otherwise, people just overlook it. I'm still not sure about a couple of the titles that I've already written, but we'll that's a whole other story. But yes, effectively this one's about mind loops and negative thoughts, because as a therapist, this was a huge issue for lots and lots of people that came into me. They would come in with various different problems, but I think that it was the number one most complained about thing was my mind is playing these mental loops, negative thoughts that I can't get out of them, which I suppose at the extreme end you're into obsessive compulsive disorder area, you know, OCD, but even just anxious people find that they get their mind stuck in these awful loops. So it's really about learning to not give that too much credence, because that is a symptom of anxiety, but it's also a cause. So this book is going to be about learning to recognize what's true, what's not true, and how not to get caught up on that stuff.
But so that's the book. How far are you into it?
I'm up to chapter 7. I expect it to be maybe 25 chapters. They're not terribly long chapters. I'm not planning to make it a huge, big, long book. Just as much as needs to be said, really. But it's,
and before you get to the end of the book, are you already thinking about a cover? You say you haven't got a title yet, but have you got a cover in mind?
No, because I'm not it just needs, I just need perhaps another, I need a week of solid sitting down with it. It's very nearly formed into what it's going to be. The intro and the introducing chapters are nice and coherent. I'm happy with them, and they're telling a story.
We're going to run out of things to write about, because I mean, obviously you write about what you know, and it's the mind, and I mean that is just, I mean, it just continues to expand, doesn't it, with everything, that all our experiences of life. We never stop learning.
No, we don't.
So,
it's been a bit of a year of that, I would say, for me as well. Personally, it's been quite a learning year this year, in a good way.
Oh, yeah. So
will I run out of things? I certainly could do. I don't want to rehash things that I've done before.
No.
And I kind of put everything into that first book because I thought that might be the only book. But the others are not rehashes for sure. Especially none of them are. They're all unique in themselves, and I think this one will be, and that's why they've all been very specific topics. I did anger management, and that was specifically about anger and so on. So I'll do it until I've exhausted all of that. But then I was thinking about books like one project I wouldn't mind doing is revisiting some of my ex-clients, if they'll be kind enough to let me do that, and ask them for updates on their stories, now having years passed.
That's a good idea.
And perhaps get some recovery stories together and sort of collate that, because I think that's so important, is hope, especially when you're really anxious or really depressed. Hope is so important, and it's very much that the whole space is about just, I'm never going to get better. This is never going to end. And I think it's really important to hear positive stories, because if you go on forums, you only ever hear people grumbling about what a terrible space they're in.
Feeding the monster.
Exactly. Everyone who's now well, they're all off living life. They're not on the forum.
It's what we choose to feed, isn't it? It's like, as you say, I always say to whoever comes to reading, if you're focused on what you want, and you don't get distracted by what you don't want, because unfortunately the mind is so easily distracted, because there are so many distractions in our world today, aren't there? Our sensories are bombarded continuously.
Definitely.
And it's learning to sort of stay focused on. Do you write full time?
It's my only job.
Okay.
Do I write full time? No, and the reason is because I get tired quickly.
Yeah.
And I want what I write to be really focused.
Yeah.
And if I'm not feeling that it is, I walk away and rest. So much as but I think it would be different if I was a fiction writer. I think fiction would be different, because I'm not saying it's easier. In fact, I have no idea how most of you guys do it, because having tried it, I think, oh my goodness, I don't even. But I'm not skilled in that art either. But I think with fiction it would be easier. But when you're dealing in facts and logic and stuff that needs to be very well presented, the wording has to be right. You've got to be really clear in here and here about exactly what it is you want to communicate. And if you feel tired or lethargic, something's just not there. So that's how it is for me anyway.
Yeah, I understand that totally. I think any kind of writing, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, do both, is it's mentally tiring, because you're having to make continual decisions, mental decisions the whole time about what word to use, what sentence to use, what paragraph to use, what's that chapter look like, what's the overall message, how does it end, how does it begin, what's the middle, who teams up. It's like, I think it's the same fiction, to be honest.
Well, I was going to say, with fiction you've got all those characters to remember as well,
so try and control and sort out. Absolutely. So yes, I think that's important for any writer, specifically indie writers, when we've got so much to do as well. It's not just the writing, is it? It's the marketing, it's the editing, it's the it's sorting out the covers, it's all the different hats, all the different skills that we have to acquire and learn to publish ourselves is a phenomenal job. And So I think we've covered near enough everything. What's your favourite book out of all the books you've written? What's your favourite one?
I like the last one, which is the How to Love Your Inner Human in a World of Anxiety.
Okay.
But mainly because it was the one where I had the most free reign to be a bit creative. And some people have said that it was a little bit, I've lost the words now, contentious. So it had a few ideas. I mean, there's a little bit of far out stuff in there, including, are we going to end up being a spacefaring human race, and why not anyway?
Why not indeed? You need to write some space fiction.
Yeah, maybe that's what I really want.
And I've got 3 credits on my Audible.
All right.
So I might have to have that, you know.
Well, if you'd like to, that would be lovely. I could always send you a freebie anyway. But
no, because I want to support you. So I will do that, as well as write a review for anxiety relief, because we know how important reviews are. Yeah. You know. Yeah. And do they link those reviews up from audio to?
No, they're separate actually. They have a separate page, but I think if on the audio page you can see the book reviews as well, but it's kind of like a link that sends you over to the book reviews. So the Audible, but it's actually probably a much better system that they do it that way, because in Audible they score you on your performance as well.
Do they?
So because I think people are very they have their own taste about what kind of voice they like to listen to. Not everybody's enjoyed mine. I've heard people say that it's been a bit too slow, so I speeded it up on the last one. I mean, I'm still learning as well with this. So if I had my time again, I think I would do the anxiety relief more quickly. I would speak quicker.
You can speed it up anyway, can't you?
You can do, yeah, you can do.
My phone. Not that I'd even want to even think about doing that. But why would anyone want a voice to be faster?
Yeah, I don't know, but
it's subjective.
It's okay. It's okay. It's just trying to get the balance right of the tone and the. Yeah.
Where can people find you online?
Oh, lovely. That would be at www.youcanfixyouranxiety.com, all one word, lowercase.
You're on Facebook?
Yes.
Facebook. All that's in your website. All that information's on your website, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get to my Facebook.
Have you got a YouTube channel?
There is. There's not a lot on it at the moment.
I was gonna say, if not, why not? Because
it's
on YouTube.
We worked on. We'll put this one on there, perhaps. That would be nice.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it'll go onto my channel. It'll go onto my Treehouse TV channel.
Lovely.
But I think what you're doing, and for your books as well, I think it's a great idea to have a YouTube channel.
Yeah, I know.
Do something regularly. You could really get the message out there. I mean, there's so much you've got to share with people, isn't it? So we've had a great time today. So thank you for joining me in the Treehouse, John. And the best of luck with all your work, all your creations.
Thank you, and likewise to you. I feel like I want to give something back. I have to figure out a way to do it. Maybe.
No, you haven't.
But it's just a pleasure to meet and have a lot. It's been lovely, really wonderful.
Yeah. Well,
thank you
for coming, and thank you to everybody for watching. And tune in next time for another episode of Tree Talk. Check out John and all of his work. As you can tell by our chat today, there's plenty of it. All right, and it's all useful, really interesting, inspirational, and healing stuff. So get on it. Get onto that website. Check him out.
Brilliant plug. Thank you.
All
right.
Bye.
Bye. See you later.